Welcome back, everyone, to Einstein's Eyes. I'm Carl Rosen, your co-host. I'm an oculoplastic surgeon, neuro-ophthalmologist in Anchorage, Alaska, for over 30 years. I'm here with my good friend and co-host from former co-resident when we did our ophthalmology residency at Albert Einstein, Dr. Jon Ditkoff. Jon?
Hi, I'm Jon Ditkoff. I'm a general ophthalmologist practicing in northern New Jersey. Been doing it now for 32 years as of this week. And yes, as Carl mentioned, we worked together, hence we named our site Einstein's Eyes because it reminded us of our wonderful residency. And we talk about a lot of different topics, mostly eye disease, but we've definitely delved into other subject matter. And today I'm really excited about this topic. And it's really an honor to have a cardiologist that I know, a doctor in the area. His office is 5 minutes from my house, actually. So we'll take it away. This is Dr. Mike Kasper, who will you can introduce yourself, but we're going to be talking about Widowmaker.
All right. Yeah. So my name is Mike Kasper. I have a practice in Saddle River, New Jersey. I started practicing, it was 2011, so 15 years. And it was started by my father. I took it over. I trained at UMDNJ and then did my residency over at NYU and came back. And then I've been in practice practicing internal medicine and general cardiology ever since then.
Michael, people get scared when they hear the term Widowmaker, but what are we actually talking about?
All right, so the Widowmaker is just it's a term that we use for a specific life-threatening type of heart attack. It generally means that the main artery in your heart is 100% blocked. That main artery is the left anterior descending artery, which basically carries about half of the blood flow to your heart. So you can imagine if suddenly your blood flow is blocked 100% in that one artery, half the blood flow to your heart muscle is gone instantly. And usually it results in something that we call like sudden death, and what that is just a ventricular arrhythmia, something that your heart cannot sustain blood flow to the rest of your body.
LAD, the left anterior descending artery, runs down the front of the heart, right?
Correct. The anterior wall.
And supplies the left ventricle, the main pumping chamber, is that?
Correct. The biggest chamber and the biggest part of the heart.
We have a diagram here of the heart and the left anterior descending running down the front of the heart. Can you explain this diagram to our audience?
Sure. So what happens, these are the arteries that feed the heart muscle. Every muscle needs blood supply, including the heart. I think people get confused because it's pumping blood and they think it's an internal thing, but it's actually on the outside of the heart. So what it does is it feeds itself after it pumps up through the aorta, which is that round arch in the center there. When the aortic valve closes, the blood flow actually flows back in and around the heart during diastole, right down those arteries. There's three main ones. That the LAD is the one right in the middle. Then you have one that wraps around the back. That's the left circumflex artery. And then there's one on the right side that you can't see in this picture.
What is the most important thing that people should know about a Widowmaker, the symptoms that surround a Widowmaker?
Usually the classical symptoms are chest pain, like a heaviness, like an elephant sitting on your chest type of thing, shortness of breath, sweating, pain down your left arm, pain in the left side of the jaw, only the bottom half. So it's only left-sided. It's very rare that, unless you have dextrocardia, which is a condition where you're born with a heart on the right side, all your symptoms should be left-sided. And it goes down to your belly button and up to the lower jaw. It doesn't go above that. That's where the innervation of the heart is in the brain. So any symptoms on that side with associated sweating, nausea, vomiting, shortness of breath, palpitations, dizziness, there's a lot of them, but those are the main ones. And most people that have events like this don't even call their doctor. They're calling 911 because they know internally something's going on that needs immediate attention. So most people, I find out after the fact, they're not calling me. They're going right to the hospital and getting immediate care.
Is it more likely, from a clot from somewhere else that's lodged, or is it more like atherosclerosis where it just gradually blocks and blocks and then it's fully blocked?
All right, so yeah, so that's a good point. So the deadliest ones are the ones that rupture. It's a plaque that ruptures in the artery. Interestingly, everyone ties it into cholesterol, which is important. But the more I'd say more novel approach to this is that it's a combined effect from cholesterol and more importantly now inflammation, right? Because the inflammation sets up your artery for plaque to go in, right? So the immune cells kind of loosen things up, and then the sticky cholesterol can get in there and plaque up. And those are soft plaques. They start at younger ages. So we're doing a lot of calcium scoring to try to pick up heart disease. But what the downside to a calcium score is it's picking up more of the end stage, right? So you don't, even if you have a normal calcium score, you could still have soft plaque that's not being picked up by the calcium score. So you always have to take into consideration the context, right? So if somebody has a lot of risk factors, they're a smoker, have a family history, high cholesterol, they have inflammatory markers, and they have a normal calcium score, that doesn't mean that they're out of the woods, right? They can have soft plaque that's not being that hasn't hardened yet. So it's an important point. But it's those soft plaques, which is why most people that have them, you hear about the young people dying suddenly, right? 40s and 50s. Those are usually soft plaques that haven't hardened yet. So once that plaque calcifies and hardens, it's a more stable form.
Michael, how would you test? What are the lab values or the tests you can do to determine if you do have a soft plaque?
That's a good question. The testing we do is kind of indirect, right? So it's your basic risk factors, your family. We do mostly history, right? So it's family history, diet, exercise, and then the stuff we do in the office, the blood work. Is generally, if you go to a primary care doctor, they're going to be looking at just a general lipid panel, which is your HDL, your triglycerides, your LDL. Use that to kind of determine what your risk is, but it actually goes beyond that. So what we do, and what I think most cardiologists now are doing, because a lot of studies are coming out that it's more than just that basic panel that we normally get, but the types of cholesterol can break down even further. There's a new one that you may have heard of called lipoprotein little a, LP little a. This is a genetic cholesterol that you're born with, and if it's elevated, your risk goes up substantially. So there are other things that we look at. We also could break down cholesterol into its size particles. So patients that have small LDL particles are at higher risk because those are the ones that are sticky and get into the vessels. If you have a profile of, say, large LDL cholesterol, you're less likely to have events. It's much more complicated than just the basic lipid panel that we get. And in fact, there's many times when people come in with normal baseline lipid panel, and then we run these more sophisticated tests, and we find out that they're actually at risk.
Let me ask one more question about it. So imagine someone does block it. So either like a ruptured plaque or it's just blocked. And let's say they have collaterals. I mean, is that enough to perfuse a heart even though the LAD is blocked or not?
Okay, so yeah, great question. That process is different than the plaque rupture, right?
Okay.
So now you're talking about slow progression of atherosclerosis. It's calcified, but it grows slowly, right?
Okay.
So now you're giving your body time to build collaterals. And on that diagram, you could see those little tiny vessels off the main artery. Well, they start to expand and start forming natural bypasses around the stenotic lesion. So I'd say, just as an example, this is not exact, but say your artery gets up to 70 or 80% block, your heart can sense that, and it sends out chemicals to signal new vascular growth to expand the arteries around it. So you're actually forming natural bypasses like they would do to open your heart and put a bypass in. Your body can do that, but it takes time. It takes years, actually. It's not going to happen quickly. So your body senses, okay, we're getting close here. It hasn't ruptured. You still have blood flow. Let's make new vessels around that artery, bypass it. And we have patients that come in with 100% blocked arteries that never had a heart attack. It's absolutely true. We see it, I would say often, but it's not that rare to see that, where you have 100% artery with good collaterals and you leave it alone. You say, well, your body took care of it. You don't need to do anything interventional, right? You don't need to go in and operate or stent it, but you do need to obviously change your lifestyle and probably be on better medications.
Michael, let's talk about intervention. Can you talk about the current state of intervention with a Widowmaker?
Yeah, so in the case of an emergency Widowmaker or LAD occlusion or any vessel, which is basically any heart attack. The idea is to get to the artery as fast as possible. The rule when I was in training was 90 minutes, door to balloon, from hospital to an open artery within 90 minutes. And a lot of hospitals use that as a way to assess their how good they are at performing these, and they use it as a marker of how well their system runs, right? So we did that a lot in training, trying to keep lowering those times, right? The faster, the better. Time is muscle.
Time is muscle, right? So
time is muscle.
So if you're having symptoms, don't wait. Don't say, I'll sleep it off. Time is muscle. Call 911, right? Correct.
100%. Even if you're wrong, you don't want to miss that one.
Gotcha.
Your best case scenario is some bad food you ate, a bad taco, and it's bad heartburn, and good. You go home, you take your antacid, but God forbid it's a heart attack. You don't want to take the risk and kind of second guess it. Like I said, most people won't. I mean, when they feel these things, it's usually pretty scary.
And can you explain how this is done for our audience? Yeah.
So usually they'll put a catheter through an artery, right? Because they got to backtrack it up through the aorta and back around the heart. So they have to pick an artery, and classically we think of the femoral artery, which is in the groin. It's a big, nice artery, has easy to get to, and they still do them quite often. But more often, they're doing now radial artery stenting. Now in emergencies, I don't know if it's user dependent. It depends on who's doing it. In general, they could use either one of those are the two most common approaches. And then going further, so then they take the catheter, and that gives them access into the arterial system. They can, under fluoroscopy, backtrack the catheter right to the front of the aorta, right where the blood comes out, which is where the coronaries are. And then they, from there, can put a wire right down whatever coronaries are blocked. On the wire is a folded up scaffold, which is the stent. And once they hit the area that needs to be opened, they literally hit a catheter with air in it. It fills the balloon, and stents open the artery, and it puts a little metal scaffolding in there.
What you can expect afterwards. So you have the stent placed. You can have more than one. Left anterior descending, the major artery for the left ventricle. That's your primary heart pump. You're in the hospital for how long? A day or two?
Well, so that depends on a lot of things. One, it depends on your ejection fraction. So if your heart took a hit, right, and you need mechanical support. There's medications like inotropes, there's balloon pumps, there's LVADs, all sorts of things to kind of let your heart rest in a major event. That could be, a week plus or more if it's a really bad one. If they get it early and you don't have a lot of muscle loss, and they get there and you don't have a lot of damage to your heart muscle, it could be a day or two. So it really depends on the extent. So don't wait. That's the bottom line, is because the longer you wait, the more damage is going to be. Then you're going to have a lot of scarring on your heart, and that's going to lead to a lot of extra support and a longer hospital stay.
Right. So Michael, let's say you leave the hospital after a couple of days. What's next? How does your life change? How do things get affected?
Well, so medications, you're going to be on different medications. You have to keep the stent open. The stents are prone to clotting when they're fresh, because the body doesn't recognize it. When blood sees a foreign object, it clots. Right, so you have to be on blood thinners. The two most common ones for the first year are going to be aspirin and clopidogrel, which is Plavix. There's some other ones, but those are the two common ones. There's 3 or 4 more. Those are the two most common, and generally you're on that combination for a year, and then you can come off either one, usually the Plavix, and stay on aspirin for life. That's keeping the artery open. The other medications to kind of support and prevent this from happening again, I think everyone's aware of things like Lipitor, Zocor, Crestor, the statins. They're the mainstay for prevention. They reduce both cholesterol and inflammation. So you're hitting, the reason why they're so powerful is they hit both of the components that cause the problem to begin with. So people say, I have normal cholesterol, why do I need a statin? Well, but it's an anti-inflammatory as well. And then the things like
about how it stabilizes the plaques. That's at least what I was, right.
Major, a good point is when you take away the inflammation and you lower the cholesterol, the plaque stabilizes. We didn't even talk about other things, but the other major things you have to watch for your blood pressure, diabetes, and then
smoking.
things, your lifestyle, your diet, your exercise, and smoking. in your family history. Had a patient in their 40s just have a big heart attack, healthy, right? But he had a very, very bad family history, and he had some of these markers that weren't picked up. It could have been prevented, but it's one of those things you don't think about. You're a healthy person. You don't smoke. You don't those type of things you don't see coming sometimes. So it's good to really at least get checked out and to know your family history.
What about sleep apnea? Does that have a role to play?
It does. So sleep apnea's biggest contributor is the inflammatory side, and it also raises your risk for stroke, high blood pressure, which is an indirect risk factor for heart disease. Yeah, the sleep apnea is a contributor. That's another thing that gets misdiagnosed, or people just don't want to treat it. I have so many patients that we talk about treating it and getting it. They don't want to go through the studies. They don't want to wear the sleep masks, but I keep trying to, reinforce how important that is.
Yeah.
But it's definitely an inflammatory. So when you stop breathing, your body sends out all sorts of signals, right? And cytokines and things that cause inflammation in your body, which was what we talked about is half the battle in prevention of heart disease. So that's a major thing.
What labs would you get if you thought that your body be making these inflammatory markers?
Right. So so on top of the cholesterol, the things that we look at, the most common ones that are being ordered, I think most primaries are doing them now, something called the HSCRP, which is a common thing. We see that a lot in patients who have any inflammatory condition. The CRP goes up. It's an acute phase reactant. It responds to inflammation, and it goes up. But now the thing is with that, it can go higher for many reasons. But if you have a baseline that's elevated, that carries a risk to it. That's probably the main one. We do other things like fibrinogen, and there's a couple other ones that are kind of being explored. I'd say they're not really in the mainstream. The biggest one in the mainstream right now is that high sensitivity CRP, C-reactive protein.
Yeah, that was really great.
Yeah, it was
Very
great. Yeah. Yeah,
I thought I knew a lot about this, but
there's a ton.
Yeah.
But Michael,
there's a
listen,
lot.
so just to summarize, so Widowmaker is a serious heart attack involving the left anterior descending artery. That's the main artery on the front of the heart. It feeds the left ventricle that does most of the pumping. Symptoms can be classic chest pressure, left side of the arm, the jaw, shortness of breath, nausea, sweating. Don't wait. Time is heart muscle. Call 911. Don't minimize the symptoms. Then we have the treatment side. Michael did a great job. It does relate to the eye. The eye, obviously,
Yeah.
we're all tied in together. Michael, thank you again. Jon, always great
You're
seeing
welcome.
you. And guys, we'll see you on the next one.
Take care.